Hey, it's Jose Galison. You're watching No Way Jose. You can find me on the No Way Jose YouTube channel, all the major audio podcatchers, and Odyssey as well. Today, my guest is Toad. He's one of my co-hosts on Tower Power Hour. We will be covering, continuing our live reading series on Democracy, the God That Failed today. I do want to let you guys know, if you are watching on today, the 27th, and you are watching the public live stream, but almost immediately after this, I will be taking it down, and then it'll be roughly a week or so later, it'll go up publicly. If you want to be able to have access to it in the meantime, or any other number of perks that I have available, because I have multiple levels of the Patreon. The lowest level is the $2. That's what gives you access to be able to watch the show in the meantime, in between that time when it's not publicly available. That way you don't have to scramble to try to catch the live streams. But the lowest level is $2. Like I said, the highest level is $20. The $20 is sponsor level. My sponsors are Mikkel Thorpe of the Expat Money Show. He has a podcast on, if you want to be one of those guys who wants to get out of the country, passports, all that jazz, figure out the taxes, whatever, what have you. He's your guy. If you just want to kind of dip your toe in it, go check out his podcast. He also does it as a business. So, you can go check out his business, and he can, give him some money and he'll hook you up. And I also have Jeremy. He has an Etsy store at etsy.com/shop/raising liberty. A lot of Liberty merch there. You can follow him on at Twitter at Jeremy Rhymes. And then a new sponsor, my very guest I have today, Toad. Toad of Tower Power Hour, which is the podcast me and him both do together with a few other rascals. But it's a fun show. We just had one last night. It's pretty much every Wednesday at 9/11. We're on YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble, all that good shit. You can also follow Toad at TPH_Toad. I want to make sure to let you guys know too as well. One of my other co-hosts on Tower Power, TopLobsta. Go check out his merch at toplobsta.com. He has my merch. He has Tower Power merch. He has Liberty Lockdown merch, Naturalist Capitalist merch, so many more. He also has stuff that's not show related, just his own original designs. And I definitely suggest go check it out. He's a good dude. And also, follow him on Twitter, all that good stuff. With that, let's go ahead and get Toad in here. Hey, what's up, man?
What's going on?
Hey, what's up? Yeah, I see Tyler in the chat saying "Do it high." I may or may not have been tripping balls on shrooms on Tower Power last night.
I was just gonna say, you're tripping balls tonight too. Is that chart that we're gonna look at gonna jump out in your face?
No, but it was pretty funny. I mean, like, shrooms is kind of like a mild hallucinogenic, but I was like, there was definitely some visuals, and it was really freaking me out during the show. There were a couple times, and for some reason, specifically your background and Reed's background, I would see weird shit that wasn't there, but not like I was like vivid stuff that there'd be like I'd kind of see on the corner of the eye. It was almost like playing mind tricks, where I was like, "What the fuck is that?" And it'd be like almost like this something that's not really there. And it was weird, and yeah, it was a fun time. I pretty much just stayed in mute and giggled the whole time. That's pretty much all I did that episode. It was a fun one.
And we all endorsed John Fetterman, and you were basically just like, yeah, what everybody else said.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with it now as well too. So whatever. But yeah, I guess let's go ahead and get in here. It's funny, after we talked about a little bit of degeneracy, now we'll go ahead and get into Democracy, the God That Failed. Right. We just did the introduction in the last episode. We knocked that all out. Now we're moving on to time preference. Time preference, government, and the process of decivilization. That's the name of this chapter. I think you guys will enjoy it. I will warn you guys, it takes a little bit before it hits its stride. A little bit dry at the beginning, a little kind of dry theory stuff. I mean, I like theory, but there's like dry theory and there's like interesting theory. This is like kind of like the economics type stuff that's a little bit more dry, a little bit at the beginning. But, it picks up. It gets better, I'm telling you. And even then, the dry stuff is important shit. So
yeah, this is the most technical chapter in the book. So like the rest of the book is really not like the first chapter, but the first chapter gets applied throughout.
Yeah, so. Sets the groundwork, yeah.
Yeah. Did I mention on last week's episode, by the way, that the first time I read this book, I was reading a physical copy of it while I was on jury duty and attempting to get on a jury, and I got sidebarred and thrown off the jury, I think because I was reading Hermann Hoppe.
Oh, no, I didn't. The one time I got jury duty, I just never answered.
Oh, I was trying to get on the jury because it was a DUI against this like old lady, and it had been like drawn out for like months, and I'm like, just let this lady go about her life. Like I wanted to get on the jury, nullify that shit, and the judge could just smell it on me. I guess it was just like, nope.
And drunk driving's cool as long as you don't, hurt anybody. So
it was a little old lady. I'm like, what did she really do? Like, come on.
Yeah, it's drunk driving's not the problem. It's drunk accidents. That's what the issue is. So
yeah,
let's go ahead and get into it. We'll try and knock out what we can this episode. We definitely won't be able to knock out the whole chapter. It's a big ass chapter, but we'll definitely start getting into it. I think the next episode and probably the following episode we'll get into the kind of stuff that's juicy. But let's go ahead and get into it.
Yeah.
Time preference. In acting, an actor invariably aims to substitute a more satisfactory for a less satisfactory state of affairs, and thus demonstrates a preference for more rather than fewer goods. Moreover, he invariably considers when the future his goals will be reached, i.e. the time necessary to accomplish them, as well as a good's duration of serviceability. Thus, he also demonstrates a universal preference for earlier over later goods and for more over less durable ones. This is the phenomenon of time preference. It sounds astoundingly simple, and it's like really dumb to kind of break it down like this. And this is how a lot of when you get into like basic economics type stuff is. But you build off of these principles, and it makes sense because it seems like an easy concept, but then when you apply it, in other ways, and you start being like, oh yeah, I get what you mean here.
Yeah, I actually read this chapter of this book before I had read Mises or like anything that Rothbard had done on economics, and I thought it was pretty concise the way Hoppe lays it out here. Like it made sense to me at least.
Oh yeah, it's very simple at this point. But like I was saying, it's kind of like that's how a lot of like the basic economic stuff is. It's like it is a little bit dry and boring, but it's very simple at the beginning, and then they build off of it. Something like human action. Humans act. Like, yeah, no shit. Like, even when you're not acting, you're acting because to not act is an act. So,
that's right.
But yeah.
That's right. If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. It's
exactly.
Rush free will.
Yep. Every actor requires some amount of time to attain his goal. And since man must always consume something and cannot entirely stop consuming while he is alive, time is always scarce. Thus, ceteris paribus, present, he likes that word a lot, uses it a lot. I don't even know what the fuck it means, to be honest with you. Present or earlier goods are and must invariably be valued more highly than future or later ones. In fact, if man were not constrained by time preference, and if the only constraint operating on him were that of time preference, and if the only constraint, wait, did I read that wrong? If man were not constrained, if the only constraint operating him were that of preferring more over less, he would invariably choose those production processes which yielded the largest output per input, regardless of the length of time needed for these methods to bear fruit. So it sounds kind of hard. For the other retards out there, basically what he's saying is if we took out time out of the equation altogether, people would just prefer more over less. Whatever the given process they have to do to get more of a given thing, that is what they prefer. But generally speaking, in typical life, you kind of store up capital, whatever. It usually, if you do something that has a longer time horizon, usually you're going to tend to have a larger yield, if you will. So, but
and ceteris paribus means like all other things remaining the same. So like
go.
A lot of things that he's going to talk about are, axiomatic truths about economics, by the way, because economics involves so many factors that you can't really account for. We're just saying that, all of the things remaining the same, this is true.
Yes, exactly. Because everyone always tries to get in a technicality. Like, well, what's this? And you're like, okay, but we're kind of speaking in. I don't have enough time to give a 4-paragraph caveat before I try to explain this principle to you.
Jason said it as well. Yeah, all of the things being equal.
Yeah, he would always save and never consume, and that's kind of like basically what I was just saying earlier. He'd always save, never consume, because he's not concerned about present consumption. He's just concerned in this given hypothetical about having more of a given thing. For instance, instead of making a fishing net first, Crusoe would have begun constructing a fishing trawler, as it is the economically most efficient method of catching fish. That no one, including Crusoe, can act in this way makes it evident that man cannot but value fractions of time of the same length in a different way according as they are nearer or remoter from the instant of the actor's decision. Really it's just as simple as, if you're hungry. Do you want one apple now or 3 apples later? Well, I'm hungry now, so I want the one apple now. It's really that simple.
Well, also, like, if you know you can build like a fishing trawler and that's going to yield the most fish, well, you can do that. But in the meantime, like, you need fish to consume or you're going to die before you even get there. So
exactly. Yep. Constrained by time preference, man will only, well, you know what better example I could have used is apple and planting the apple to make an apple tree and get a shitload of apples later. Well, I guess that doesn't work because you can always take the seeds out. That doesn't work. Fuck off.
Bob Murphy I think he uses an apple tree as an example. He, in his show, the Bob Murphy show, like really early on in the show, he did like a 3-part series on time preference, which was where he was talking about why he doesn't think pure time preference is necessarily entirely correct, but that like 3-part thing was one of the best things I've ever listened to. And he was using Bavarick's explanation of time preference as like a guide in that. Like, I think people should listen to that. That's some really good stuff.
Yeah. Constrained by time preference, man will only exchange a present good for a future one if he anticipates thereby increasing his amount of future goods. The rate of time preference, which is and can be different from person to person and from one point in time to the next, but which can never be anything but positive for anyone, simultaneously determines the height of the premium which present goods command over future ones, as well as the amount of savings and investment. The market rate of interest is the aggregate sum of all individual time preference rates, reflecting the social rate of time preference and equilibrating social savings and social investment. All right, do you want to interpret that for the people here? Because did you get that?
Well, I mean, he is sort of just talking about how basically just the entire market worth of people, I guess, let's say, kind of that determines what like the average interest rate is going to be. Which I think it's more about where he's leading by saying this is that he's going to start talking about like how the Federal Reserve intentionally lowers interest rates. And in doing so, they're setting the interest rate lower than what it would be as dictated just by the market, because the market is going to dictate it based on like how much production has there been so far, like leading up to this. And once you've had, a period of like production for a while, like then you're going to be able to start consuming again, right? Yeah. So you have like shifts in periods of savings and periods of consumption. Mm-hmm. So that's essentially what he's saying here. And it's reflected in the interest rate, which is sort of like the price of money. It's the price of borrowing money. So if you have extremely low interest rates, like the Fed is setting them low at all times, that's disincentivizing saving at all times, because you're not going to get that much interest back on your money if you're saving it. So you're going to be consuming all the time because you're incentivized to do so.
Yeah, which makes sense with his first sentence. Constrained by time preference, man will only exchange a present good for a future one if he anticipates thereby increasing his amount of future goods. Because there's zero purpose in saving if you have nothing to gain from it. So the decreased interest rate, which would essentially de-incentivize your reason to save, essentially. Because if you're only making 0.5% accrual off of whatever money you're saving, it's kind of like, well, what difference is it really that much more valuable holding on to it, or I could just use it now for whatever given thing I want at this moment in time. So, all right. Yeah. No supply of loanable funds can exist without previous savings, i.e., without abstaining from a possible consumption of present goods. And no demand for loanable funds would exist if no one perceived an opportunity to employ present goods productively, to invest them so as to produce a future output that would exceed current input. Indeed, if all present goods were consumed and none invested in time-consuming production methods, the interest rate would be infinitely high, which anywhere outside the Garden of Eden would be tantamount to leading a mere animal existence, i.e., eking out a primitive subsistence living by encountering reality which with nothing but one's bare hands and a desire for instant gratification. Which I know he's going to kind of sort of lead to this later, and this is kind of the damaging. And this isn't me necessarily saying there should always be a high interest rate, but the damage of having an insanely low interest rate, it's like a decivilization type thing, because you essentially are not in any way providing a reason for people to or to do anything for the future whatsoever. There's no gain to be made, and that's kind of like that's why he says, to infinite ad absurdum. I forget the fucking term it is, but if you were to apply it to this ridiculous
reductio ad absurdum.
Reductio ad absurdum. There you go. If you applied that there, say you did a negative interest rate, that literally is essentially bringing humanity, in a sense, back to an animal type existence, just living hand to mouth, essentially.
Right.
All right. A supply of and a demand for loanable funds only arise, and this is a human condition, if it is recognized first that indirect production processes yield a larger or better output per input than direct and short ones. Second, are you going to say something?
Well, that's one of the Bombard work, like time preference things where he talks about roundabout production processes.
Yeah. All right. Second, it must be possible by means of savings to accumulate the amount of present goods needed to provide all those for all those wants whose satisfaction during the prolonged waiting time is deemed more urgent than the increment in future well-being expected from the adoption of a more time-consuming production process. This is basically a lot of more words to basically saying that you need to, kind of basically what I said earlier. You need to have some sort of incentive to actually be able to save. Otherwise, what's the point of fucking saving if you have nothing to really gain from it, or if you're losing money by saving? Like if you have a negative interest rate, you're theoretically losing money keeping it in the bank. So, or if you have a super high inflation, what have you. It's kind of a lot of us say, buy gold, buy crypto, because your money, your dollar is literally losing value. So it just depends on at what rate is it losing value and at what rate can you make money off of it, an investment, whatever. So long as these conditions are fulfilled, capital formation and accumulation will set in and continue. Land and labor, the originary factors of production, instead of being supported by and engaged in instantaneously gratifying production processes, are supported by an excess of production over consumption and employed in the production of capital goods. Capital goods have no value as intermediate products in the process of turning out final goods later. And insofar as the production of final goods or products is more productive than without them, or what amounts to the same thing, insofar as he who possesses and can produce with the aid of capital goods is nearer in time to the completion of his ultimate goal than he who must do without them. The excess in value, price, of a capital good over the sum expended on the complementary originary factors required for its production is due to this time difference in the universal fact of time preference. It is the price paid for buying time, for moving closer to the completion of one's ultimate goal rather than having to start at the very beginning. For the same reason, the value of the final output must exceed the sum spent on its factors of production, the price paid for the capital good and all complementary labor services. All right.
Right.
You want to put that in layman's terms for people?
Well, that last thing he's essentially talking about, like a producer needs to be able to make profit. That is going to be what they need to be incentivized to produce. Mm-hmm. So they're going to want to make money off of this thing. So they need to be able to sell that thing for more than what they put into it. So he's he put a lot in that paragraph. He was talking about the difference between capital and consumer goods. Consumer goods are that end good that people are going to consume, and capital goods are goods that essentially are able to aid in the production process and make the production process more efficient. That's essentially what's going on in that paragraph. I don't know if I missed anything.
No, there is a lot in there. I do highly suggest people read it. This is one of those things you can go over multiple times. It'll get a lot less technical as we go through, I think. Maybe in certain chapters it will get more technical again. But
right, and his other point kind of before that was basically because all of the people that are involved in the market are the factors that are going to determine whether or not more people are going to be saving right now or more people are going to be consuming right now. He's basically going to be saying later, he's implying already that no central authority can set that interest rate or whatever and tell you this is what you must be doing right now. And he is also saying that production must precede consumption, of course, because you have to produce something before you can consume it.
Yeah. The lower the time preference rate, the earlier the onset of the process of capital formation, and the faster the roundabout structure of production will be lengthened. Any increase in the accumulation of capital goods and the roundaboutness of the production structure in turn raises the marginal productivity of labor. This leads to either increased employment or wage rates, or even if the labor supply curve should come backward, sloping with increased wage rates to a higher wage total. Supplied with an increased amount of capital goods, a better paid population of wage earners will produce an overall increased future social product, thus also raising the real incomes of the owners of capital and land. All right. This is, I mean, in essence is saying, the lower the time preference rate, the more people are willing to save, the more you will tend to, essentially the wage earners will tend to make more, and then additionally the people who we pay said wage earners will earn more. Everybody wins type bullshit. If you have anything to add to that or no?
No, I mean, I think you got that. Basically wage rates increasing should kind of go along with the rate of production also increasing, which, when the government comes in and fucks everything up, that tends to no longer be the case.
Yep. All right, next section. Factors influencing time preference in the process of civilization.
Yeah.
Yep, this one starts getting a little bit better. A little less, don't get me wrong, economics is great, but we all know it's kind of a little boring. It's just more fun when you start. It's fun when you take the economic principles and apply them to other things, or but when you're just going over the dry technical economic stuff, it's a little bit much. Among the factors influencing time preference, one can distinguish between external, biological, personal, and social or institutional ones. External factors are events in an actor's physical environment whose outcome he can neither directly nor indirectly control. Such events affect time preference only if and insofar as they are expected.
Yeah.
They can be of two kinds. If a positive event such as manna falling from heaven is expected to happen at some future date, the marginal utility of future goods will fall relative to that of present ones. The time preference rate will rise and consumption will be stimulated. Once the expected event has occurred and the larger supply of future goods has become a larger supply of present goods, the reverse will happen. The time preference rate will fall and savings will increase. All right. It's on to you. I don't know if you have anything to add on that little section, but it's on to you to read.
I mean, he's basically saying that, so you have certain things that can be expected. So if you expect that you're going to have this supply of things, like if you're, you could use the apple tree example potentially. If you know that you're going to have a bunch of apple trees that are done growing in the future at a certain time, then that might mean that you're going to have a higher time preference, and you might want to consume more of the apples now because you're going to have more in the future as well.
Yep. That's basically, that's why I kind of want to use this as a manna example, because it's like manna just dropped from heaven. You have a shitload of consuming to do. There's not really any, you're not going to plant manna, or there's less of a need to store up food for consumption or whatever in this given example. But all right, let's go ahead.
Right. Where are we at here?
On the other hand.
Yes. On the other hand, if a negative event such as a flood is expected, the marginal utility of future goods rises. The time preference rate will fall and savings will increase. Right. So, people stocking up water or something like that, when they know a hurricane is going to come in, or stocking up toilet paper for absolutely no reason when COVID started.
Yeah.
But that was, where am I? After the event, with a reduced supply of present goods, the time preference rate will rise. So what he was saying before is once that manna falls, or once the apple trees have grown or whatever, then the time preference rate will fall again, and you'll have to start saving more again because you don't expect more to happen in the future like that. And then with a negative event, it's just the total opposite of that.
Yeah.
And he's not necessarily saying that, because all of this is expected. So he's not really saying that the increase and decrease in time preference here is bad or good in these cases. He's just saying that it falls and rises as people expect these things, which is just an expected thing. It's just a phenomenon that we can observe.
Yeah, and the expected thing is a key point, which we'll get into later, where we get into unexpected occurrences.
I wonder what might cause that.
Yeah.
Which is what I was about to say about the COVID shit. I'm like, well, that wasn't actually expected, I wouldn't say. Biological processes are technically within an actor's reach, but for all practical purposes and in the foreseeable future, they too must be regarded as a given by an actor, similar to external events. It is a given that man is born as a child, that he grows up to be an adult, that he is capable of procreation during part of his life, and that he ages and dies. Ooh, getting dark now.
Yeah, this is where we start getting to the point where he applies time preference to, and this is where a lot of people will say stuff like economics is everything, because you kind of can apply economic principles to sort of almost everything. It's just a lot of people will debate. I guess it really comes down to a definitions thing. Like if you're like, well, because he gets into like applying time preference to social things, say degeneracy or whatever. Like, and a lot of people be like, well, that's not economics because it's not dealing with money or property or et cetera, or whatever. So then you just get down to a definitions thing. But in a certain way, you kind of can apply it, especially since all that money is a representation of value. And then, you can say relationships are things you value. What kind of value do you put on it? Like you can say a rich man doesn't necessarily have to be a fucking millionaire. It can be someone who, lives in the mountains and is, lives off the land and is happy and has a good family. That could be a rich man because he could value that more than the millionaire values his possessions. So, So, and this is kind of what he's getting to. But, oh, hey, what's up, Clint? I see you in the chat. But,
what's up, Clint? Clint was just on Break the Cycle. They were competing with us tonight. Yeah. What I remember taking away from when Hoppe starts talking about like the lifespan of a person, I do remember him really like nailing the fact that when he starts talking about people wanting to like save their stuff so that their children can inherit it. Like it has a lot to do with like saving for future generations and whether or not you value that.
Yeah, and it'll get into how it applies to governmental systems,
right?
And in what incentives different systems have. An easy example is a senator that's in for 4 or 6 years or whatever. They're just going to try to get their money. And let's say, in this given time, say the elite know this thing's going to shit. They're just going to try to get their money and try to pass it off to the next guy because they know they're going to be able to take care of themselves and their family. They'll be fine. It's going to be all the middle class and lower class people that are going to be really fucked.
Exactly. And then he winds up comparing and contrasting systems of government as far as that's concerned too, where he talks about how in democracy you have like these temporary caretakers where they're just not really going to give a shit, where they'll just use like all of the stuff that they steal from the people essentially. Whereas in a more privatized or, a monarchy essentially that is closer to like a private system of government, if you want to call it that, where that like your descendants are going to be inheriting your stuff, that you would actually like take care of that stuff more and want to save it for them.
Yeah, good example. Hunter Biden is not going to be taking over shit. So that's why it's got his dirty dick beaters in every money scheme they can, So profiting off of us. But all right, let's
they got to get him on the board of directors at Burisma. Yeah.
Yep.
These biological facts have a direct bearing on time preference. Because of biological constraints on their cognitive development, children have an extremely high time preference rate. They do not possess a clear concept of a personal life expectancy extending over a lengthy period of time, and they lack full comprehension of production as a mode of indirect consumption. Accordingly, present goods and immediate gratification are highly preferred to future goods and delayed gratification. Savings investment activities are rare, and the periods of production and provision seldom extend beyond the most immediate future. Children live from day to day and from one immediate gratification to the next.
Yep.
Yeah, so, and then that's like what he's going to say with government heightening everybody's time preference. He's kind of like making them behave like children because then they're not thinking about the future as much at all, and they're only desiring immediate gratification as well.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when a child, that's expected, but once you become an adult, he's going to say that it's less expected. Whereas an adult, you want to be able to make sure that your children are provided for. You have way more of an incentive to save. And then once you're, and that goes like up until your death, basically. Like, do you want to just consume all of that for yourself, or do you want to save? Do you want to provide for the next generation, for your children? Which is why I think, having children is an important
that's what I was about
thing.
to say, because that is an important. It gets to do, it kind of has the inverse relation if you don't have familial connections in your old age. Because if you have nothing left to live for, if you're just some, I don't know, a Hugh Hefner type or something, it's kind of like, why wouldn't you just live up and bang horse? Like you have nothing. You have in your head, aside from maybe the legacy for him of like Playboy or whatever, like he doesn't really have anything to live for. He knows he's going to die. He doesn't have anything he really specifically cares for that needs to pass on to. But this is why things like that are important. I also think it makes a more enriching life. It's not just a matter of that's better for the collective and that you're providing for the future, right? I personally think it makes a more enriched life. But all right, let's keep going.
Should we answer Gene Ice's question, by the way, about the inverted yield curve?
I don't.
I would say I don't think that it disproves anything that Hoppe is saying here. I think the inverted yield curve, as far as I know, and again, Bob Murphy has done like a bunch of really good work on this, and that's how I know about this for the most part. The inverted yield curve is seen by a lot of Austrian economists as sort of like the best predictor of a market crash. So I would say that like the inverted yield curve could be something that really only happens when you get into a really bad economic state, because the Fed has been like keeping interest rates low the whole time. And what an inverted yield curve means is that I believe that it means that short-term bonds are going to yield more than long-term bonds will, which is almost never the case.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. We're in the course of becoming an adult.
In the course of becoming an adult, an actor's initially extremely high time preference rate tends to fall. With the recognition of one's life expectancy and the potentialities of production as a means of indirect consumption, the marginal utility of future goods rises. Saving and investment are stimulated, and the periods of production and provision are lengthened. Finally, becoming old and approaching the end of one's life, one's time preference rate tends to rise. So this is what I was just talking about a little while ago. The marginal utility of future goods falls because there is less of a future left. Savings and investments will decrease, and consumption, including the non-replacement of capital and durable consumer goods, will increase. This old age effect may be counteracted and suspended, however. I wonder how that might happen. Owing to the biological fact of procreation, an actor may extend his period of provision beyond the duration of his own life. If and insofar as this is the case, his time preference rate can remain at its adult level until his death. So that's what I was saying. If if you become an old person and you don't have any children, you have like nothing to save for, so you're just going to wind up consuming. You have nothing left, right? And he's going to say that people that get into government, like a democratic form of government especially, are going to behave in that manner. Whereas if you have children and you want to provide for them, your time preference won't become as heightened because you're going to want to pass something on to them. And generally, the way that it has worked up until very recent generations would be that you would want your children to sort of surpass what you've done. Within the constraints imposed by external and biological factors, an actor sets his time preference rate in accordance with his subjective evaluations. How high or low this rate is and what changes it will undergo. What changes it will undergo in the course of his lifetime? What changes it will undergo in the course of his lifetime depend on personal psychological factors. One man may not care about anything but the present and the most immediate future. Like a child, he may only be interested in instant or minimally delayed gratification. In accordance with his high time preference, he may want to be a vagabond, a drifter, a drunkard, a junkie, a daydreamer, or simply a happy-go-lucky kind of guy who likes to work as little as possible in order to enjoy each and every day to the fullest. That's one of my favorite lines in the early part of this book. I love when he kind of just goes off on that. And we could, sling that like an accusation of being that way against a lot of people who consider themselves to be libertarians. So
yeah, just the idea of, we all need to be free, and then just disregarding the whole responsibility aspect.
The libertine style.
Yeah, and like, in my take would be too, is just I think it's just a matter of like, it's not even so much responsible. I just think it's more fulfilling. Like, I think you're going to have a better life if you are. And don't get me wrong, I think it's a balance thing, because then he kind of illustrates it here in a second, the idea of a one extreme or the other. Obviously, I think the best idea is to try to get some sort of like passive incomes or have multiple streams, so that, because you do kind of want to be able to have you do want to be able to work as little as possible in order to enjoy each and every day to the fullest, but you also want to be able to make income. So it is a balancing act. Like, so, I mean, personally, because I think family connections are important, and then also having time to, actually, strengthen those connections, which, kind of like you went to earlier with the old age thing. Like, even if you are someone who procreates, if you don't maintain close familial connections and you just end up getting thrown in a home, that kind of destroys the whole, concept in a lot of ways too, to where it'll fuck up his time preference too. So,
right. And as he was pointing out a little while ago in this chapter, like, you don't want like an extremely low time preference or an extremely high time preference necessarily. It has to be, there has to be a balance there, because like even in the low time preference scenario, you don't want it to be so low that you're going to only care about saving for your child and you're just going to like die before you can even save as much for them as you intend to. Right. So,
like, I know it's kind of almost like a meme to make fun of people for being high time preference individuals or something like that, but high time preference and even low time preference are not really meant to be negative connotations. They're more just descriptive, because the idea is it depends on the scenario. Everyone's flexible. Just like he said, if you are, a flood's about to hit or something, you're going to be low time preference for that period of time. But if you behaved in that manner, in that extreme of a low time preference thing on any other given time, it would almost be probably a little bit of a negative in some light. So it really, and if you're, the Robinson Crusoe situation where you're starving on an island and you see food, like, it's really the first thing to be like, oh, how can I invest these and find ways to create? No, you're going to eat the fucking food because you're going to starve to death if you don't. And that's a high time preference act, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's negative. And so that's what a lot of people get wrong about Hoppe. Yes, if you exist eternally in a high time preference mode, it's probably not going to work out so well for you. Maybe you should work on your impulse control. I don't know what to fucking tell you, but there are definitely situations where it makes sense to be high time preference and situations that make sense to be low. These are just descriptive things, not necessarily negative attributes. So
and a lot of it could be like in situations where you need to defend yourself in various scenarios and things like that. Like, that can be considered high time preference behavior, but is that actually behavior that you shouldn't be acting upon in that case?
Exactly. Where
was I? Another man may worry about his and his offspring's future constantly. And this is what I was saying. You could have time preference that's actually too low as well. And by means of savings, may want to build up a steadily growing stock of capital and durable consumer goods in order to provide for an increasingly larger supply of future goods and an ever longer period of provision. A third person may feel a degree of time preference somewhere in between these extremes, or he may feel different degrees at different times, which I think is definitely the case with basically everybody, unless you're a robot, and therefore choose still another lifestyle career.
Yep. However, no matter what a person's original time preference rate or what the original distribution of such rates within a given population, once it is low enough to allow for any savings in capital or durable consumer goods formation at all, a tendency towards a fall in the rate of time preference is set in motion, accompanied by a process of civilization. And to put that simply, it's kind of the more low time preference people act, especially as individuals, the more likely it'll cause others around you to kind of be more low time preference, and this will cause a savings effect. This will cause increased, production in the future. This will, kind of build up civilization, et cetera, et cetera. It's really that simple. Because if you as an individual are saving and, essentially creating surplus, out there in the world, or cheaper goods or whatever, it's going to make other people around you's lives better. it will make them more likely to act in a similar fashion, and that effect will extend outwards. So
correct. Yeah.
Yep.
And the opposite of that is also true.
Yes. Yep. The saver exchanges present goods for future goods with the expectation that these will help produce a larger supply of present goods in the future. If he expected otherwise, he would not save. Which, that's a key point, because if you expect otherwise, you would not save. It's kind of like when you lower the fucking interest rate. It's kind of like people don't really have, if you had a 0% interest rate, it really is kind of like, well, why the fuck would I save? Unless you're, I guess, doing some sort of investment thing or something. But
and the other thing the low interest rate does is it incentivizes companies like producers to borrow more. Where, like there might not be anything to really back that up. So they might be borrowing more and investing all this in what they think is going to be future production, and then only later realize that they don't actually have the amount of capital goods produced even to actually wind up producing that consumer good that they intended to. And the whole, process kind of falls apart. And that's what the Fed lowering interest rates causes.
Yeah. If these expectations prove correct, and if everything else remains the same, the marginal utility of present goods relative to that of future ones will fall. His time preference rate will be lower. He will save and invest more in the past, and his future income will be still higher, leading to yet another reduction in his time preference rate. Step by step, the time preference rate approaches zero without ever reaching it. In a monetary economy, as a result of his surrender of present money, a saver expects to receive a higher real money income later. With a higher income, the marginal utility of present money falls relative to future money. The savings proportion rises, and future monetary income will be even higher. Moreover, in an exchange economy, the saver investor also contributes to a lowering of the time preference rate of non-savers, which is what I talked about a little bit earlier. Yeah. With the accumulation of capital goods, the relative scarcity of labor services increases, and wage rates, ceteris paribus, will rise. Higher wage rates imply a rising supply of present goods for previous non-savers. Thus, even those individuals who were previously non-savers will see their personal time preference rates fall. In addition, as an indirect result of the increased real incomes brought about through savings, nutrition and healthcare improve, and life expectancy tends to rise. In development similar to a transformation from childhood to adulthood, with a higher life expectancy, more distant goals are added to an individual's present value scale. The marginal utility of future goods relative to that of present ones increases, and the time preference rate declines further. I love how he covers like every angle, because even the increasing or improving society will likely lead to better lives, more economically enriched lives, and longer lives. And if you have a longer life, you have a longer time horizon, which is going to allow you to have more of an idea to think for the future. Simultaneously, the saver investor initiates a process of civilization. In generating a tendency toward a fall in the rate of time preference, he and everyone directly or indirectly connected to him through a network of exchanges matures from childhood to adulthood and from barbarism to civilization.
Right.
In building up an expanding structure of capital and durable consumer goods, the saver investor also steadily expands the range and horizon of his plans. The number of variables under his control and taken into account in his present actions increases. Accordingly, this increases the number and time horizons of his predictions concerning future events. Hence, the saver investor is interested in acquiring and steadily improving upon his knowledge concerning increasing number of variables and their interrelationships. Yet, once he has acquired or improved his own knowledge and verbalized it or displayed it in action, such knowledge becomes a free good, available for imitation and utilization by others for their own purposes. Thus, by virtue of the saver's saving, even the most present-oriented person will be gradually transformed from a barbarian to a civilized man. His life ceases to be short, brutish, and nasty, and becomes longer, increasingly refined, and comfortable. Basically, the point being is if you start doing things differently and people seeing you do those things differently and realizing the possible results of doing said things, they are more likely to do similar or the same thing. and it goes on from there. It's once the first person created the cotton gin, then other people started probably doing similar things. It started going to others, something along those lines.
Well, and it's just more likely that will be the case, I guess, because once you continue to innovate, create all these capital goods that make people more productive, like everybody's going to be wealthier, and that will tend to keep time preference rates lower as well. Where, like we were saying, I think like there could be those two extremes, but I do think it is probably ideal to have a time preference rate like across the population that is relatively low, but not at the like extreme low where they're not consuming anything at all and keeping themselves alive. But
it's also situational. So it's like, we would prefer people to have lower time preferences, but if you're in a situation that dictates a higher time preference, you may be a little silly to have that lower time preference. You want to go as low as possible without basically fucking yourself, essentially. And then more people do that, then the lower you can go with it, and so on and so forth. All right, here we go. Now we got to get this.
This graph is about coming up. And one other thing I will say is that like today we tend to like kind of think of like civilized people as like being these like coastal like liberals in cities and whatever, which is ridiculous. And that's kind of not the case, because it tends to be that these people are kind of like actually like the leeches in a way, if you get what I'm saying.
Yes. I do. I mean, I guess it highly depends on what they're doing, but I guess
they're kind of leeching off of like past generations in a lot of cases, I would say, like leeching off of the wealth that has already been accumulated prior to them, and they have no idea how to actually do that for themselves.
All right, figure 1, the figure you guys see. I don't know if you need a larger screen to do it. This might be you should be able to see it. If you're looking at your little phone, it might be a little hard, but whatever. Provides a graphic illustration of phenomena of time preference in the process of civilization. It relates individual time preference rates, the height of the premium of a specified present good over the same good at a specified later date, which induces a given individual to engage in intertemporal exchange. I probably shouldn't have read that parentheses. That just makes it more confusing. On the vertical axis to the individual's real money income on the horizontal. And I'll let you take over from there.
All right. In accordance with the law of marginal utility, each individual time preference curve, such as T1 or T2, slopes downward as the supply of present money increases. The process of civilization is depicted by a movement from point 11, or is that 11? Point 11 with a time preference rate of T11 to point 22 with a time preference rate of T22. This movement is the composite result of two interrelated changes.
If you're listening in audio, you probably could just fast forward a couple, 30 seconds, because it's not going to make sense without the visual. But go on.
We can try to simplify it as well, or explain what's going on here. On the one hand, it involves a movement along T1 from point 11 to 12, representing the fall in time preference rate that results if an individual with a given personality possesses a larger supply of present goods. On the other hand, there is a movement from point 12 to 22. This change from a higher to a lower time preference curve with real income assumed to be given represents the changes in personality as they occur during the transition from childhood to adulthood in the course of rising life expectancies or as the result of an advancement of knowledge. So basically what we have is he's got like multiple different curves here that are sort of sloping in the same way, because you have an overall slope here. So he has like the vertical axis is the time preference rate and the horizontal is the real money income. And what he has is as the person's real money income is increasing, their time preference rate is going down. However, he's showing it as kind of a curve that flattens out a bit. So like really you can only have like your time preference rate or your you really can only have your time preference rate be going like it's limited by the extremes essentially, which is why it has that kind of slope to it. But the other thing that he's saying is he has multiple different curves here and their slopes are exactly the same because time preference rate versus real money income has the same effect. regardless of where you are, but where you are in your life, like based on how old you are, what your current knowledge or experience is, you can be on a different curve as well, even though that curve is going to slope the same way. Like your overall time preference may be lower than it was at some other point in your life or lower than somebody else's.
Yep.
But both of your curves are going to be impacted the same way by real money income.
Yep. All right. Now we're on to time preference, property, crime, and government. Getting better. I'm telling you guys, it gets juicier as we go.
It does. The actual amount of present goods allocated to the production of future goods depends, on the one hand, on a person's technical knowledge. For instance, without the knowledge of how to build a fishing net, Crusoe obviously could not have begun to exchange present goods for future ones, that is, to save and invest. On the other hand, given a person's technical knowledge, the amount of saving depends solely on his supply of present goods and his time preference schedule. The smaller his supply of present goods and the higher his time preference schedule, the higher his effective time preference rate and the lower his actual savings will be. So again, that's just which, like one of those curves he's on at all. In the beginning of humanity, there was only land, nature-given resources and obstacles, and labor, human bodies. Strictly speaking, the only given supply of any good is that of body time. The supply of all other goods, be they perishable or durable consumer goods such as berries or caves, or indirectly useful goods, production factors, such as berry bushes and their surrounding land, is not given. It is the result of someone's prior action, of the appropriation, homesteading of nature by a specific individual. The facts and laws of nature and human biology are givens, of course, and nature as such may be generous or skimpy, but only through an individual's act of appropriation is nature turned into a supply of goods. It is even more obvious that the supply of all produced goods is not given, be they consumer goods, which have been stored, conserved, or made more durable, or produced factors of production, capital goods. They are all the outcome of the activities of specific individuals. Finally, technical knowledge is also not a given. That one potato saved today can yield 10 potatoes 1 year from now. Or the fact that one potato saved today can yield 10 potatoes 1 year from now may be a fact of nature, but one must first have a potato. Yet, even if one did, and one were perfectly willing to invest it for this return or an even lower one, such a fact would be irrelevant unless the person in question knew the laws of potato growing. Thus, neither the supply of present goods nor technology is given or fixed. Rather, they are artifacts created with the intention of improving their appropriator producer's well-being. These expectations can turn out right or wrong, and rather than securing a profit for the actor, his actions may result in a loss. But no one would spend any time picking berries unless he expected the berries to be edible. No one would appropriate a berry bush unless he thought that this would enhance his berry harvest. No one would want to learn about any fact or law of nature unless he anticipated that such knowledge would help him improve his circumstances.
I do like that he continues to emphasize the knowledge aspect here and the idea that these are things that essentially we discover and they improve people's lives as we go on. I know it's simple, the potato example, but this is kind of a lot of the point of this, time preference stuff too, is you discover new things, new ways to produce, and people, go on and do similar things. Kind of like when there's lights all around me right now. At some point, someone had to figure out a light bulb, and now here we are. So, in a sense, that enriched my life.
Right, and he sort of tied that all into self-ownership, but he is saying that man started out as just man in nature, basically, and had to start producing something to stay alive.
Yep.
And a lot of people, kind of overlook that fact or just completely disregard it because we have so much stuff, and all the stuff that's surrounding us is a product of people's knowledge, like you were saying, people's technical skill and whatever else. Like, people have produced all this stuff, and as a single individual, we don't know how to produce any of those things just on our own, really. Yeah. So like I pencil kind of.
Yeah, and like in a certain sense, the lights that are around me have lowered my time preference because I no longer I am essentially able to reroute a lot of my resources into savings and other ways because I don't have to provide for that or what have you. I don't have to spend fucking hours splitting wood and to burn fires or whatever. The tendency to, in a social context, an individual's supply of appropriated and produced goods, his time preference schedule, and hence his effective time preference rate may also be affected by the actions and the expectations regarding these actions of others. The tendency towards a fall in the time preference rate and the accompanying process of civilization will proceed so long as has so far been tacitly assumed to be the case, as no one interferes with another's acts of nature, appropriation, and production. So long as this is the case and each person is respected by everyone else as the owner of his supply of body time and whatever goods he has appropriated and produced, such that everyone may enjoy, unmolested by others, all present and future benefits to be derived from these goods. The existence of more than one person either leaves the tendency toward a fall in the time preference rate unchanged, or even accelerates and reinforces the very process. The former is the case if and insofar as A appropriates a previously unowned, nature-given good, or if he transforms such a good into a different one without causing any physical damage to the goods owned by another person.
Mm-hmm.
A supply of present goods or the value of such goods for A is increased, and hence, ceteris paribus, his time preference rate will fall. Because A's acts have no impact on the supply of goods owned by B, B's time preference rate remains unaffected. Furthermore, the tendency will actually be accelerated insofar as A and B, based on the mutual recognition of each other's property, exchange in voluntary trade or cooperation, and even without any such exchange insofar as they merely observe each other's activities and copy each other's knowledge.
Yeah.
For any voluntary trade or cooperation between A and B increases ex ante the supply and / or the value attached to the supply of the goods of both parties, and hence the time preference rate of both A and B will fall. Moreover, by learning facts and laws from one another, such as that there are potatoes, that potatoes can be eaten, or that one's present potato yield or may yield 10 future ones, the tendency toward a fall in the rate of time preference spreads from one person to another. So like that one was written pretty well in that it explains itself. We don't really need to talk about that one too much.
Yeah, man. Property rights. If you if you respect them, and like you were saying earlier, he's even talking about just merely by observing what somebody else is doing, you can learn from that. You get more knowledge, and then your time preference rate can fall that way, and it can fall by producing your own stuff or by voluntarily exchanging with somebody else to your mutual benefit. So all of that is going on there.
However, if violations of property rights occur and the goods appropriated or produced by A are stolen, damaged, or expropriated by B, or if B restricts the uses that A is permitted to make of his goods in any way, then the tendency toward a fall in the rate of time preference will be disturbed, halted, or even reversed. The violations of property rights and the effect they have on the process of civilization can be of two kinds. They can take the form of criminal activities, including negligent behavior, or they can take the form of institutional or governmental interference, which is a lot of people just like to pretend that one doesn't fall in that case, but it's still a property rights violation. Just because someone somewhere said, I have the right to do this doesn't mean, they do.
Yeah. The one thing that I remember about this that I took away from the main thing that he's going to say here is that, we'll get into it, but he's going to compare and contrast like an individual violating another individual's property, which is like a one-time thing. So it may only have like a temporary effect on heightening that person's time preference. Like, they have to defend themselves. This is the
expected thing. This is the expected point I was getting at earlier.
Right.
Yes,
that's unexpected. So you don't have to change your behavior entirely because you don't expect it to happen again.
Yeah.
Whereas in the case of a government, that's just a constant violation, and it is expected all the time. So you have to change your behavior all the time to account for that. So that's the main point that he's going to make.
Well, I guess it's not even expected is the key point. Expected and kind of generally unavoidable. Because with crime, he even does make the point later that sometimes it can be expected, but you can create provisions to buffer yourself against that.
I would say that it's constant versus temporary.
Yeah.
The government is a constant violator, whereas the individual doing it is a temporary violation.
The all right, I read that. The characteristic mark of criminal invasions of property rights is that such activities are considered illegitimate or unjust not only by the victim, but by property owners in general, and possibly even by the criminal himself. Hence, the victim is considered to be entitled to defend himself if need be by retaliatory force, and he may punish and or exact compensation from the offender. The impact of crime is twofold. On the one hand, criminal activity reduces the supply of the goods of the victimized appropriator, producer, exchanger, thereby raising his effective time preference rate. On the other hand, insofar as individuals perceive a risk of future victimization, they will accordingly reallocate their resources. They will build walls and fences, install locks and alarm systems, design or buy weapons, and purchase protection and insurance services. The existence of crime thus implies a setback in the process toward a fall in the rate of time preference as far as actual victims are concerned, and it leads to expenditures by actual and potential victims, which would be considered wasteful without the existence of crime.
Right. And there is kind of this cascading effect too, like what you would see in like cities, for example, whereas when you have this like process of decivilization, you have like the government, their government police force not defending property, like not enforcing any of that. So you have these constant property violations that way too. And then people have to account for that at all times. So they're going to do things like he just said, like, I need an alarm system. I need guns. Like I need all these ways to defend myself against this. Whereas if you're living in a much safer environment, you would not have to invest as much into that. And you could spend that money and time and effort actually being more productive than that.
Yep. Therefore, crime or a change in its rate has the same type of effect on time preference as the occurrence or a change frequency of natural disasters. Floods, storms, heat waves, and earthquakes also reduce their victim supply of present goods and thus increase their effective time preference rate. And the perceived risk change of natural disasters also leads to resource reallocations and expense adjustments, such as the construction of dams, irrigation systems, dikes, shelters, or the purchase of earthquake insurance, which would be unnecessary without these natural risks. More importantly, however, because actual and potential victims are permitted to defend, protect, and insure themselves against both social disasters such as crime as well as natural ones, the effect of these on time preference is temporary and unsystematic. Actual victims will save or invest a smaller amount of goods because they are poorer. And I'll pass this off to you here. I do want to point out, for me, I have to say it because he'll kind of get into it. We're kind of in the midst of it right now. Me being the agorist guy here, I do think it's fair to point out that kind of a lot of the point a lot of us are getting at is you kind of should look at it as kind of the same. If you do have this realization of this is essentially a property violation, this is essentially criminals, there's not much of a differentiating factor except for the power that these individuals have. You should do what you can to keep what you have and put in certain stops. Maybe even it's kind of the idea of if a criminal comes to your house and says, "Give me all your money," and then you only give them half your money, and like if you do a little bit of deception or whatever, it's kind of like there's nothing wrong with that. And it's the same idea applies with the government. And so I think it's more of a mind thing, which I guess he probably kind of does get that too. So, yes, you're never going to be able to probably completely be able to be like, completely skirt away everything. You also need to, weigh your risks, the risk and reward type thing. Like if you're skirting your taxes in this way, you probably should be aware of the possible result of that and, think about that and whether you're willing to buy that. If you're doing some sort of, tax skirting and you're making $100,000 of profit and that likely if you do get caught, you'll probably, get hit with 50. You'll get hit for 50,000. It's like, well, that's a net benefit. And so then, like, yeah, I guess some people be like, what's a crime? And I don't want to do it. Be like, well, I mean, you're literally making profit here. So, like, now if you're talking jail time, this complicates things. But my point being, weighing the risk and war or risks, reward, whatever the fuck. So yeah, but yeah, we'll get into that later.
Yeah, he's about to get into the temporary versus systemic violations that I was referring to, where he's comparing and contrasting it at an individual level to the government level. And of course, at the individual level, it's going to be not only temporary, but it's more likely that you'll be able to like fend off that violation than it is that you can fend off, a fucking government that has way more power.
And that's kind of my point. I was reaching at that point in my head and I forgot it, but it's essentially like, yeah, to look at criminals, but you could almost look as a gang came to your house. Like if a cop does something shitty to you and you blow them away or you're even fighting or anything, it's probably not going to end well for you. But you literally could apply that in the same thing as if a gang of 10 dudes came up to you and, we're trying to extort you for money. You're also probably equally as retarded to be like, no, I'm going to fucking fight you all. Like unless you have some distance between them and you, and you have a large magazine, like on you, like it's probably not going to end well for you. Like, like it's the same idea. It's the idea of like, well, here we are. There's not much fending I can do here. So, but
you might get Waco'd, man.
Yeah. It's just a larger criminal essentially is all it is a way to look at it. But go on.
Are you going to finish the paragraph or?
No, it's a long ass paragraph. You
ahead. And the altered risk perceptions among actual and potential victims shape the direction of their future actions. But as long as physical protection and defense are permitted, the existence of social or of natural disasters does not imply that the time preference degree of actual or potential victims, their degree of future orientation will be systematically changed. So what he's getting at here is if we think about that graph that we just looked at again, where you have the different curves. So something like an individual, like violating your property or whatever, that's going to shift you along the same curve that you're currently on and temporarily affect what your time preference rate is. But a government, which is like a permanent, constant change, and it will actually jump you like to a higher curve of time preference entirely, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So your rate of time preference will increase, but you'll actually jump completely to a different curve because that that constant factor is just changing it completely forever, basically.
Mm-hmm.
After taking account of the damage and redirecting one's activities, the tendency toward a fall in the rate of time preference and the attending process of civilization will resume its previous path. In its course, both the protection against crime and natural disasters can be expected to undergo continual improvement. Matters fundamentally change, and the process of civilization is permanently derailed whenever property rights violations take the form of government interference, however. So this is basically what I just described again. The distinctive mark of government violations of private property rights is that, contrary to criminal activities, they are considered legitimate, not only by the government agents who engage in them, but by the general public as well, and in rare instances, possibly even by the victim.
I would say not even in rare instances.
I don't think that's rare.
Yeah, most instances, I think the victim is like, well, got to pay my taxes.
Exactly. Hence, in these cases, a victim may not legitimately defend himself against such violations. I don't know. I guess, it makes sense to say not. I would say that they won't, but it also makes sense to say that they can't really, because if they do, they're going to get arrested or something like that.
I mean, they can. It won't end well. That's why I kind of used the criminal example earlier. It's kind of the same idea of if there's 20 dudes trying to take money from you, like, yeah, you can defend yourself. Probably not going to work out for you. Right. But more power to you if you do. That's cool.
You've gone blurry, Jose. I don't know what's going on with your connection or whatever.
Maybe I just changed out my router today. I've been having internet issues, so maybe that's it. I don't know. Whatever.
I can still hear you fine.
You can?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. You're just blurry like Bigfoot.
Probably a little bit of delay too. Whatever. If I cut out, you can just finish it. We'll end on the next page right before government growth and the process of decivilization. But hopefully, if I do cut out, I'll come back. But
Okay, I see what you're doing. Yeah, so we'll stop at the end of this section. You look better now again, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
As always, you look great.
I did a little skincare today, but go on.
Very sexy.
Yeah.
The imposition of a government tax on property or income violates a property or income producer's right as much as theft does. I mean, it is theft, so yes.
Yep.
In both cases, the appropriator producer's supply of goods is diminished against his will and without his consent. Government money or liquidity creation involves no less a fraudulent expropriation of private property owners than the operations of a criminal counterfeiter gang. So now we're talking about the Fed printing money. Moreover, any government regulation as to what an owner may or may not do with his property, beyond the rule that no one may physically damage the property of others and that all exchange and trade with others must be voluntary and contractual, implies a taking of somebody's property on par with acts of extortion, robbery, or destruction. But taxation, the government's provision of liquidity, and government regulations, unlike their criminal counterparts, are considered legitimate, and the victim of government interference, unlike the victim of a crime, is not entitled to physical defense and the protection of his property. Exactly. So that's like all the stuff that we have already been saying pretty much. But he is saying that the government sort of interfering with your property rights takes three forms, which are taxation, printing money, which causes your money to be worth less over time, and regulation, which is essentially like everything else. I guess you could lump in under regulation.
I would clarify too, when he's saying like they're not entitled to physical defense and protection of his property, he means in like a real world sense, in perception of the masses and how it's going to work out for you. I'm sure if you're taking the natural rights approach, if you want to be the sovereign citizen, go right ahead. You'll get no. I may tell you it's dumb, but whenever do what you want. I think it's fully within your rights in that natural rights sense. But in a what's really going to happen, just like I use the example of a large gang, like you have every right to defend yourself against 20 dudes trying to mug you. It's just probably not going to work out well.
Right. Yeah. He's just saying that, in the case of the government, if you try to do anything like that, they're going to throw you in a cage. So
yes,
it is against their laws, essentially, is what he's saying here. Because of their legitimacy, then, government violations of property rights affect individual time preferences systematically, differently, and much more profoundly than does crime. Like crime, government interference with private property rights reduces someone's supply of present goods and thus raises his effective time preference rate. Yet government offenses, unlike crime, simultaneously raise the time preference degree of actual and potential victims because they also imply a reduction in the supply of future goods, a reduced rate of return on investment. So again, that's like the jumping to a different time preference curve, I would say.
Once again, I do want to point out, in a certain sense, I kind of don't like the differentiation because it is crime, it is theft, but I get why he's doing it for the purposes of this.
I was thinking that as well.
Yeah.
I think, he's sort of just referring to the fact that it's, it's not against, like he's basically saying the government is above their own laws, essentially.
Yes. Yeah, and the point that I've made multiple times too, this is crime. We're only differentiating it for, I guess, more for the understanding of the reader, but in a certain sense, they literally are basically the same thing. It's just the only difference is one of the criminals is a much larger group. It's much more organized that also has a populace that, will kind of stand by tacitly, essentially, or even sometimes, root against you or even actively, work against you. So it's different in that sense. But, it's really no different than if you had a local area that had a mafia and, they did fucked up shit, but a lot of people liked them. And they're just kind of like, well, that's the mafia. In a lot of senses, some mafias at certain periods of time were basically essentially not much different than the government. And funny enough, a lot of times they actually usually handle things a lot better than the government.
I was going to say, I think in most cases, if you if you buy off the government a little bit, the mafia a little bit, you could buy their protection. Like they would actually protect you in a lot of those cases, whereas the government won't.
Exactly. All right.
Yeah.
Crime because it is illegitimate, I believe.
Crime because it is illegitimate occurs only intermittently. The robber disappears from the scene with his loot and leaves his victim alone. Thus, crime can be dealt with by increasing one's demand for protection goods and services relative to that for non-protection goods. This is stuff that we were already talking about before, so as to restore or even increase one's future rate of investment return and make it less likely that the same or a different robber will succeed a second time with the same or a different victim. In contrast, because they are legitimate, governmental property rights violations are continual. The offender does not disappear into hiding but stays around, and the victim does not arm himself but must, at least he is generally expected to, remain defenseless. Consequently, future property rights violations, rather than becoming less frequent, become institutionalized.
Which obviously the deduction there, which I think he gets into later, is it not even becoming less frequent. It will increase, but he'll get to that later.
Yeah. So. And I would say I would say perceived legitimacy rather than legitimacy when we're talking about the government here. But yes.
Yeah, you also got to take into account Hoppe. English is not his first language, and then also you could probably got to think about the way that he's writing. It's to illustrate a point. If he was writing specifically in our vernacular, it may not make the same point in a certain way, if that makes sense. I got a super sticker for $10 from JC. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah,
thanks.
JC. Hell yeah.
All right, I'll take over from here.
All right.
The rate, regularity, and duration of future victimization increases. Instead of by improved protection, the actual and potential victims of government property rights violations, as demonstrated by their continued defenselessness vis-a-vis their offenders, respond by associating a permanently higher risk with all future production and systematically adjusting their expectations concerning the rate of return on all future investment downward. Competing with the tendency toward a falling rate of time preference, another opposing tendency comes into operation with the existence of government. By simultaneously reducing the supply of present and expected future goods, governmental property rights violations not only raise time preference rates, but also time preference schedules. Because appropriator producers are defenseless against future victimization by government agents, their expected rate of return on productive, future-oriented actions is reduced all around, and accordingly, all actual and potential victims will become more present-oriented.
Yeah, so it's like, in that apple tree example, again, I guess you could say, like, rather than expecting, like, all of your apple trees to produce, like, a certain amount of apples, and that that's going to happen, the government being involved is like saying that amount of apples that is going to be produced is forever less than that, if that makes sense at all. So you're going to change your behavior entirely.
Yeah. As will be explained in the course of the following section, if government property rights violations take their course and grow extensive enough, the natural tendency of humanity to build an expanding stock of capital and durable consumer goods and to become increasingly more farsighted and provide for ever more distant goals may not only come to a standstill, but may be reversed by a tendency toward decivilization. Formerly provident providers will be turned into drunks or daydreamers, adults into children, civilized men into barbarians, and producers into criminals. All right, and that concludes this reading for today. Next one we'll continue the time preference chapter, but we'll go into the section of government growth, and the process of decivilization from monarchy to democracy. Now we're getting into it. I'm telling you, the further we get in, the more juicy it gets.
I love when he's calling people drunks and barbarians and stuff. I'm into it. I like his colorful language there. And I will say, just in response to what was going on in the chat here, that I think about the Fed, JC is correct, that it isn't that the Fed is like a bunch of buffoons that are making mistakes. Like, I think they are truly evil people, and they know exactly what they're doing. They're intentionally devaluing the currency.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on who you're talking about. I mean, obviously, there's always going to be the
It could be
true
both,
believers. Yeah, there's always going to be the true believers in just about every system, aside from maybe like the Rothschilds or something. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, like, I mean, and whether it's intentional or unintentional, it's kind of the incentive still create the same product. Even if you do pop in and you're like, oh, I'm the Fed chair and I'm here for 4, 8 years or however long they keep me here. I mean, I don't know. What kind of incentive do you really have to? You're just kind of like I mean, even if you're like, oh shit, this is fuck, you might just be like, I just need to get the fuck through this, and so
yeah, but also they're kind of incentivized to do that because they're like, hey, if we just continually print more money, then we're going to be able to hand out more and tell the people that, hey, we have more for you, basically.
Yeah, and everyone likes that. No one likes the guy that does the prudent thing of like, hey, let's raise interest rates. Let's, whatever, And even then, you can have too high of an interest rate. So, like, the whole idea this is even like a thing that's supposed to be controlled by people is kind of fucking retarded. So.
Exactly. Yeah, obviously, yeah. The Fed should not be controlling it at all. They shouldn't be raising. If they raise interest rates at this point, they'll crash the economy. If they raise them even slightly too much, even a slight increase, really. But yeah, I mean, really, the only thing that you could do is what Hoppe was talking about at the beginning of that chapter, and you need to let it be a function of the free market, and that should dictate what the interest rates are at any given time.
All right, man, let's get the fuck out of here. Drop your plugs. We'll be back. We'll probably try to do this, I'm assuming, a week from now. I mean, we can talk scheduling. We don't have the next one scheduled, but we'll keep knocking them out consistently. So,
yeah, Toad, TPH_Toad, Tower Power Hour, which I do with this guy, Jose, right here, and Cole, who I saw in the chat a little while ago, because Cole, we know, doesn't know anything about what time preference is. So hopefully he was here. Hopefully he learned something from this episode.
Yeah. I created this just for Cole, so he doesn't actually have to read.
Cole got the Fat Dave, because he is Fat Dave. He got the shout out from Dave Smith today, so that was pretty awesome. We got Clint Russell and sometimes Reed Coverdale on TopLobsta, also on Tower Power. We're a bunch of degenerates. We make a bunch of dick jokes and just be really offensive. We had an episode last night. We were talking about Fetterman a lot and a bunch of other stuff. I'll put that episode up everywhere tomorrow. It is still on YouTube right now, so check that out. We're live every Wednesday night on that show.
Yeah, we stream to YouTube and Twitter and Odyssey. We can't Rumble yet because we just created a Rumble. I don't think we have enough subs yet. So if you're here and you have a Rumble, please go do it. Go subscribe, even if you don't ever intend on using the Rumble, just so we can start streaming there.
Yeah, subscribe to the Rumble, and we also just opened up a Patreon, which right now is mostly general support. But if you support us at the highest level, you'll also get a pretty big TopLobsta discount on Tower Power Hour merch. So.
Yeah, 30%, I believe, and we'll give you the promo code, and you get that discount. But and I really think the even for the lowest level, I think we should do like some sort of mailbag thing to where like people can just send us.
We should. I'll send them pictures of my mailbag.
Yeah, for real though, I think it should just be like they can send us fucking whether it's a clip they think is funny, and we can play them, and we can kind of go through mailbags every week to kind of like riff off of. But all right, I'm Jose Galison. I'm at Senor Jose 2020 if you want to follow me on Twitter. Hopefully, Elon will get it's my third account, I think, third or fourth. My other two accounts, I think it was two other accounts. I think it's my third one. I got to 3K for both of them. Got nuked.
I think you had 4 actually. I think you had Jose Galison, Gallison Jose, and Senor. Or no, you're Senor Jose now. You had No Way Jose 2020 or some shit.
I feel like I feel like this is my fourth, but I might be wrong. I don't know. Either way, I fucking hopefully he gives me the shit back.
I want Anarcho Toad back. Let's go.
Yeah, no, dude. The whole crew. If we get our shit back, it will be rolling deep. I'm hoping that happens, so that should be good. But this is No Way Jose show. You can follow me on YouTube, all major auto podcasters, Odyssey as well. I mean, if you like this stuff, I have other live readings I've already done. I've done all the other Agorist works, the 3 books of Konkin. I think those are only live reading ones so far, but I've also cover a lot of theory and stuff too. Do a little bit conspiracy stuff, covered OKC, but check out my content, see what other stuff I got. I'm sure you enjoy this, I'm sure there's other stuff that I have that you'll enjoy. But if you want to support me, patreon.com, just No Way Jose 2020, and like, share, subscribe, comment, all that gay shit. Let's get the fuck out of here. It was fun, and it's getting more juicy as we go. I'm looking forward to the next one. and
All
we
right.
are out.
Peace.